In today's lecture, we're going to look at the discussion and conclusion section of research articles. The discussion conclusion section typically follows the results section in most research articles. In some disciplines, however, most commonly the natural sciences, we do find research articles that end with the methodology section. And in that case, the discussion and results, or discussion and conclusion still is in existence, but would occur before that methodology section. And it would still include those conclusive remarks and the interpretation of the study findings, regardless of where it occurs. So the discussion conclusion section has different sorts of names and different sorts of structures depending on your particular field. It can be either combined into one section, the discussion conclusion section, or it can occur separately, where you'd have a discussion section and a conclusion section separate from each other. And you can see here in this slide some possible names that can also be used. Would include things like summary or other sorts of names for this section. In some disciplines, however, and some papers within those disciplines, the functions of the discussion section can actually overlap or really be combined with the functions of the results section. And in those cases, the discussion section or the results section, or both of those sections, are often renamed results and discussion, whereas the conclusion would then normally be separate from that combined section. Another thing to be aware of as you're looking at these discussion conclusion sections of papers is that there's a lot of variation both within a particular discipline and between disciplines in terms of the headings and subheadings that can be used. And there can be a lot of different types of subheadings depending on the sorts of features that an author needs to discuss, including things like limitations of the study, future directions, suggestions for further research, and other sorts of subheadings. Now, even though there's all this variation, the functions of the discussion conclusion section are quite critical and are pretty clear. And there are these three main functions that we're going to discuss. One of these rhetorical functions is to state and summarize the principal findings of the study, to discuss these results, and interpret them in this broader context of the discipline. And a third function is to really highlight the value of those results, to acknowledge the limitations of those results, or to propose further directions and ways to take the study results into new directions. So, these are kind of important functions, but you should note that the functions in the discussion conclusion section are really going to depend upon the functions that were used in your results section. So if an author chose to use or to provide the interpretations of those results in the results section, then the same interpretations are unlikely to occur in the discussion section. So the discussion section in that case would focus more on expanding those results, discussing the paths that they might lead to in future research, for instance. It also might depend on whether the results and discussions are combined or not. And if so, then some of the functions in the discussion conclusion section could be quite similar to the functions used in the results section. So all of these different sorts of choices are going to make a difference in how the discussion, conclusion, and in many cases the results sections are going to be structured. They're very independent upon each other. Let's see. So one of the things you've got to be considering as you are setting up this final piece of your paper is the sorts of information to be including in your discussion and conclusion sections. And as I've said, that will depend, really dramatically on what you've included in the results section. So some of the things you could include would be to discuss some of the relevant background information that is needed to better provide context for the argument that you're building, to discuss the results within the context of your study, to interpret those results in the context of the discipline as a whole, and then also to discuss the significance of the results or their implications, as well as conclusions and limitations. But If you've chosen to discuss background information to set up your results, for instance, you may choose not to discuss that again in your discussion conclusion section. And it can be really important to give background or to give meaning to those reported results, with some sort of interpretation and explanation. But if you've done that in your results section, you don't need to do that again in a discussion section, in a separate section there. So these are very, very interdependent upon each other. All of this really applies as well to this discussion of the significance of your results, the implications, limitations. This information can really be included either in the results section or in the discussion section, depending on your field, your personal choices as an author, and the particular needs of the study that you've designed. So let's discuss the moves here, and there are 4 moves within the discussion conclusion section. Move 1 is called Reestablishing the Territory, and we use this move to ground the discussion, to kind of remind readers of the key important elements that they need to have in mind as they are hearing your explanation of the meaningfulness of your results. And this is the place where you bring in that background information. You might restate the study-specific details. You might restate your principal findings that you just discussed in the results section, quite briefly. You may summarize them. Or you could summarize just the main points of your research to provide background for the rest of your discussion conclusion section. And this information may or may not have been included earlier in the paper. So you may reintroduce information you discussed in your introduction, methods, or results section, or you may be including some new information here. Move 2, which we call Framing Principal Findings, is the place where you comment upon the results that you obtained in your study. And these comments would include things like some reasoning, explanations, interpretations, and also things like deliberations, the sorts of weighing the results that go beyond just the objective statement of the findings. And so moving beyond we found X to really shaping what it means that you found X. Move 3, our next move here, is called Reshaping the Territory. And in this move, the authors take their particular study and position it within the larger discipline. So you might compare your work with results of previously reported studies and compare your findings from your study to someone else's. The last move, Establishing Additional Territory, is used to expand beyond your findings, to interpret your results within a broader context of the discipline and the world at large by really discussing the significance of your results. So what do these mean in a larger context? You might reflect on potential limitations. What are some of the limits on interpreting our results? And also drawing some conclusions from what those results mean, as well as discussing the potential implications. So if our results are true, what else does this tell us about the discipline, the world at large? And as always, remember that the moves that we've discussed here, although we've numbered them in order, and then, of course, the steps within them can occur in different orders in your field as well as in your particular study. They can overlap, and we can move back and forth between them. So these are the 4 moves within the discussion and conclusion sections. Here are the next few tasks for us for you to do. There's a reading. And that reading will help you kind of work through this information again. The discussion and conclusion sections can be quite complicated because the information can occur in so many different places. So we'll really want you to go look at your corpus to see how the things we've discussed here are really in evidence in your own field. You'll want to look at how is that discussion conclusion section structured? Is it 1? Is it 2? What sort of names does it have? How long or detailed is it, to really start kind of getting a feel for how what we've discussed is realized in your particular discipline. And And then we're going to discuss each move and the steps within it in the future presentations. To get prepared for that, after you do your corpus exploration, there's also a short quiz, and then we'll move right into discussing the different moves within the discussion and conclusion sections.